Hello, my name is Caleb Reeves. I'm 30 years old, living in Atlanta, working as a vintage machinery restoration engineer at a high-end mechanical workshop. My job is to breathe life back into old machines, the classic cars people call heritage. They're not just steel and iron, but stories, memories of those who once owned them. I love the quiet of this work, the clank of metal, the faint smell of engine oil, and the feeling of my hands touching parts that have lived through decades. It makes me feel like I'm doing something meaningful, as if I'm preserving a piece of history. I got married a year ago. My wife Mira is 27, an accountant with warm brown eyes and a smile that once made me think I was the luckiest man alive. We live in a small apartment in Atlanta, not too luxurious but cozy enough. I think my life is okay. Not perfect, but okay. I grew up in Savannah, Georgia, in an old wooden house quietly nestled by the river. My father, Weston Reeves, was a master mechanic, respected by the entire town. He didn't just fix cars, he created them, turning rusted hunks of metal into works of art. My mother, Evelyn, a retired elementary school teacher, was always gentle but easily swayed by emotions. Then there's my younger brother, Dylan, 2 years my junior, who's an entirely different story. He's cunning, smug, and always seems to find ways to dodge responsibility. I love my family, but things aren't always smooth. That morning I was at the workshop, hands smeared with oil, carefully reassembling the carburetor of an old Mustang. Suddenly my phone buzzed in my pocket. I wiped my hands on an old rag, frowning when I saw my mother's number. She rarely called during work hours. I pressed the answer button and her voice on the other end was trembling, almost incoherent. "Caleb, can you come home right away? Your father, he's gone." I froze as if the world had suddenly stopped spinning. "Mom, what did you say?" "This morning he had a stroke in the garage. He was polishing the Aston Martin when he collapsed. The doctors said he went quickly. There was no time to save him." I don't remember what I said next. Maybe I mumbled some meaningless words, then hung up, my hands shaking so badly I dropped the wrench onto the floor. My father, Weston Reeves, 68 years old, as sturdy as an oak, the man who'd laughed hoarsely over the phone last night when I asked him about tuning an engine, was gone. I drove to Savannah with an empty mind. The highway blurred before my eyes, not from rain, but from the tears I tried to hold back. I didn't want to believe my father was gone. Not him. Not the man who always taught me that a good machine never lies, you just have to listen to it. The funeral took place at a small church in the Savannah Riverside Cemetery, where dim light filtered through old, stained glass windows. The organ played slowly, mingling with the scent of incense, old wood, and the damp mist drifting in from the river, making the air feel even heavier. My mother sat in the front row, her eyes red, clutching a white handkerchief soaked with tears. Dylan, my brother, walked in wearing a sharp black suit, his hair neatly combed. He nodded lightly to everyone, but his eyes avoided mine. He's always been like that, always knowing when to show up, but never facing the raw truth head-on. Family, friends, and my father's old clients filled the room, sharing stories about the legendary Savannah mechanic. They spoke of nights he stayed up to save a vintage car from ruin, of his passion and integrity in every detail he touched. I listened quietly, my eyes fixed on my father's portrait on the wooden stand. They mentioned the 1969 Aston Martin DB6, his greatest pride, a car he'd refused to sell even when someone offered $6 million. I stood before his casket, looking at his face, peaceful as if he were sleeping. I wanted to say something, but my throat tightened. I only placed my hand on his chest, silently promising to preserve what he'd left behind. 2 weeks after the funeral, the family lawyer, Mr. Mitchell, came to the house to read the will. We sat around the old dining table where I used to eat toast for breakfast and listen to my father's stories about the cars he'd fixed. My mother sat in the middle, Dylan on one side, Mira and me across from them. Mira held my hand under the table, but I could feel the tension in her fingers. Mr. Mitchell opened the file, his voice steady but sharp. "Weston Reeves left a very clear will. The wooden house and all savings will go to Evelyn Reeves. The pocket watch, along with a note about the value of time, is left to Dylan Reeves. And the 1969 Aston Martin DB6 will go to Caleb Reeves. The room fell silent. My heart pounded. The Aston Martin, my father's pride and joy, the thing he cherished more than any possession. I hadn't expected to inherit it, but hearing my name stirred a mix of pride and responsibility. I looked at my mother, hoping to see her smile, but she only bowed her head, her hands clasped tightly. Dylan broke the silence. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the wooden floor. "What? A watch? Dad left me an old watch while Caleb gets a car worth millions? Was he that biased?" "Dylan, sit down," my mother said, her voice soft but trembling. "Your father had his reasons." "Reasons?" Dylan nearly shouted, his eyes bloodshot. "I'm his son too. I have rights. That car should be split." I looked at him, saying nothing. I'd long known Dylan wasn't the kid who used to follow me around Dad's garage. He'd dropped out of school, lived off empty promises and loans from friends. But I didn't expect him to explode like this right in front of Mom. "Dylan, enough," I said, my voice low but firm. "Dad left what he wanted. We have to respect that." "Respect?" Dylan sneered, pointing at me. "You're always the good son, aren't you? Always Dad's favorite. And me? What do I get? A worthless keepsake?" Mira squeezed my hand tighter, as if urging me to stay calm. But I couldn't miss my mother's look. She glanced at Dylan, then at me, and I saw a flicker of hesitation in her eyes. "Caleb," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Maybe you should consider selling the car. Share some with Dylan. He's your brother." Her words cut like a knife. I stared at her, incredulous. "Mom, that car is Dad's legacy. He left it to me because he trusted me to keep it." "But Dylan's your brother," she repeated, her voice almost pleading. "Family shares, Caleb." I didn't respond. I just stood and left the room, feeling like a crack had formed in the wall between me and my family. Mira followed, but she didn't say anything, only resting her hand on my shoulder. I wanted to believe she understood, that she'd always be by my side. But deep down, a bad feeling began to take root. When I returned to Atlanta, I threw myself into work as a way to forget everything. The workshop was the only place where I felt I still had control. It helped me temporarily escape the image of my father lying still in his casket, Dylan's angry eyes, and my mother's trembling voice as she sided with my brother. I thought if I kept my hands busy, my mind wouldn't have room for the wounds. But Mira was different. She began to change, little by little, like small cracks in a pane of glass I tried not to notice. She came home later, often citing overtime at the accounting firm. A new, sweet, unfamiliar perfume clung to her clothes, not the kind she usually wore. Her phone, which I'd never paid much attention to before, was now always locked with a password. When I asked, she laughed, saying it was a new company policy for data security. I nodded, trying to believe her, but every time I looked into those brown eyes, I sensed a distance I couldn't bridge. "Caleb, are you okay?" Mira asked one evening as I sat dazed on the sofa, staring at the family photo on the wall. It showed the four of us, Dad, Mom, Dylan, and me, during a riverside picnic when I was a teenager. Dad was smiling, his hand on my shoulder, while Dylan grimaced, forced to stand still for the picture. "I'm fine," I replied, my voice hoarse. "Just miss Dad." Mira sat beside me, placing her hand on my knee. "I know. It'll be okay, Caleb. We'll get through this." I looked at her, wanting to believe her promise. But something in her eyes, a flicker of avoidance, a hint of hesitation, kept me from feeling fully at ease. I told myself it was just my own stress, that Mira was still the loving wife I knew. But I was wrong. 3 months after Dad's death, everything fell apart. I came home after a long day at the workshop, exhausted but relieved after finishing the restoration of a 1963 Corvette. I'd planned to cook a simple dinner, hoping to talk with Mira and bridge the growing gap between us. But when I opened the door, an unnatural silence greeted me. The apartment was empty. No sound of footsteps, no soft music that Mira usually played when she was home. Her favorite coat was gone from the hook. Her blue high heels, the ones she often wore, were missing too. I called her name, my voice echoing in the small apartment. No response. My heart raced as I stepped into the bedroom. Half of Mira's wardrobe was empty, as if someone had hurriedly packed. A sinking feeling hit me and I rushed to the garage out back, where I kept Dad's last legacy, the Aston Martin DB6. The garage door was wide open and a cold, empty space stared back at me. The car was gone. I stood frozen, feeling the ground collapse beneath me. Back in the house, I found a note on the kitchen counter scrawled in Mira's handwriting. "I'm sorry, I need to be away for a while." I called her, trying every number, but only got the endless ring of a deadline. I texted, but there was no reply. I sank to the kitchen floor, crumpling the note in my hand, feeling like my entire world was disintegrating. I don't know how long I sat there, hours maybe, until the sky turned pitch black. I drove to Savannah, to the old wooden house where I grew up. I needed to talk to someone who understood me. Mom was my only option, though deep down I still hurt from how she'd sided with Dylan during the will reading. Mom opened the door. Her eyes were tired, her silver hair disheveled, her face weary under the yellow light. "Caleb, what are you doing here at this hour?" Her voice was hoarse, laced with worry. I didn't beat around the bush. I told her everything, about Mira, the car, the note she'd left. I didn't cry, but my voice trembled as if each word was being wrenched from my chest. "Mom, I don't understand. Why would she do this? Did I do something wrong?" Mom sat down, her hands clasped, her eyes avoiding mine. "Maybe Mira just needs time to think, son. Don't be too quick to blame her." I frowned, unable to believe my ears. "Time?" She took Dad's car, vanished without a word, and you say she needs time? Mom lowered her face, silent. Her fingers fidgeted with her old wedding ring, a habit when she was anxious. Then, in a fleeting moment, her voice slipped out, almost as if speaking to herself. "Maybe. Dylan was wrong to let things go this far." I froze. "What did you say?" She flinched, her eyes widening as if realizing she'd said too much. I didn't mean that. I mean, don't read into it. It's not what you think." My heart tightened. "Not what I think? Are you saying Mira and Dylan?" Mom didn't answer, just bowed her head. The room was dead silent, save for the ticking of the wall clock. I took a step toward her, my voice hoarse. "How long have you known?" She shook her head, still avoiding my eyes. "I thought it was just a passing thing." Dylan said, "It was a moment of weakness. I was afraid telling you would hurt you more." I stared at her. "So you chose to stay silent? You chose to hide it?" She looked up, tears streaming down her face, her voice trembling. "Caleb, don't be like that. Dylan was wrong, but he's still your brother. You can't turn your back on family." I let out a bitter laugh, the sound harsh in the small room. "Family? You call this family? Dylan betrayed me, stole my wife, and you still take his side?" Mom buried her face in her hands, her sobs breaking the silence, and I stood there, feeling my heart crack. The most painful thing wasn't the loss. It was realizing that the people I trusted most were the ones who stayed silent when I needed them the most. I left Mom's house in anger, not looking back. The rain started to fall, cold drops stinging my face, but I felt nothing but emptiness. I drove back to Atlanta, my mind reeling with images of Mira and Dylan. I pictured them laughing together while I was here alone with the shattered pieces of my life. I began to wonder if I ever truly knew Mira. She was once the woman I loved, the one who held my hand through tough days, who smiled brightly when I talked about old cars. But now, she was a stranger, someone who chose my brother over me. And Dylan, he'd always been selfish, but I never thought he'd stoop to this. Their betrayal wasn't just a loss, it was a wound that cut deep into my pride. At night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the empty apartment, the dim yellow light casting shadows on the wall, where the silhouettes of my father, my family, and myself seemed to blur. I let my mind drift back to the past, to the days when I believed our family was an unbreakable bond. But now, looking back, I realized the cracks were always there. I just pretended not to see them. Dylan and I grew up together. My father, Weston Reeves, was a strict man who never coddled his children's emotions. He believed love was shown through actions, not words. Every afternoon, he'd take Dylan and me to the garage, where the Aston Martin DB6 was always covered with a pristine white cloth. "This isn't just a car," he'd say, his voice low but firm. "It's honor. A man must keep his promises, whether to himself or to this machine." I loved those hours in the garage with Dad. I learned how to unscrew every bolt, listen to the engine's hum, and understand that every car had its own story. I was 15 when Dad first let me hold a wrench, and I remember the proud look in his eyes when I fixed a small issue in the ignition system. "Good job, Caleb," he said, patting my shoulder. "You've got a mechanic's hands." Dylan was different. He always found ways to dodge work. He'd lean against the wall, chewing gum, and ramble about his friends at school. Dad never scolded Dylan, but I saw the fleeting disappointment in his eyes whenever Dylan abandoned a task to run off and play. "Dylan needs time," Dad told me once when I asked why he wasn't stricter with my brother. "He'll find his own path." But Mom was the opposite. She always wrapped Dylan in a blanket of warmth. When Dylan broke her favorite vase, she just ruffled his hair and said, "It's okay. You didn't mean it." When Dylan got bad grades, she blamed the teachers, saying they didn't understand him. When Dylan was 16 and got caught stealing money from her purse to buy new shoes, she only cried and hugged him, saying she'd give him money if he needed it. I remember standing at the doorway, watching that scene, feeling like an invisible wall stood between me and them. Dad didn't agree with Mom's coddling of Dylan. Once I overheard them arguing in the kitchen, Dad's voice low but laced with anger. "Evelyn, you're ruining that boy. He needs to learn responsibility, not be sheltered forever," Mom replied, her voice trembling. "Weston, he's my baby. I can't let him suffer." Dad didn't say anything more, but I saw him shake his head and walk out to the garage. I didn't exactly blame Mom, not entirely, but her favoritism made me feel like an outsider in my own family. Dad was fair to both of us, but Mom always gave Dylan a leniency I never had. One memory I can't forget is the summer when I was 18. I'd just graduated high school and got accepted into a technical school in Atlanta. Dad was proud, though he didn't say much. He took me to the garage, pointed at the Aston Martin, and said, "One day, Caleb, you'll understand the value of preserving what matters." I nodded, though I didn't fully grasp his words at the time. Dylan, then 16, wasn't as fortunate. He got expelled from school for cheating on an exam, came home, sprawled on the couch, and listened to music. Mom cried all evening, but instead of blaming Dylan, she baked his favorite cookies and said, "You'll be fine, Dylan. I'll find you another school." Lying there on my old bed, listening to the rain patter on the porch, I thought about Mom. How she always shielded Dylan even when he was wrong. I remembered her eyes when she revealed the truth about Mira and Dylan, eyes filled with pain and pleading. She wanted me to forgive, to hold the family together. But how could I forgive when everything I loved had been torn apart? How could I look at Dylan without seeing betrayal, without picturing Mira by his side? Then I thought about Dad. His fairness, the way he taught Dylan and me different lessons, but always with good intentions. He wanted me to be strong, wanted Dylan to find his own path. But Dylan chose the wrong one, and Mom, with her blind love, had unwittingly pushed him further astray. I closed my eyes, trying to push those images away, but they clung to me. I thought about the Aston Martin, about Dad's hands touching every detail of it. That car was his soul, a reminder that I had to live with honor. But now it was gone, along with my trust in my family. A week had passed since Mira left, taking the Aston Martin and a piece of my soul with her. I tried to keep myself busy, cleaning the apartment, polishing tools in the workshop, and focusing on the old cars waiting for restoration. But every time I stepped into the garage where the Aston Martin once stood, I felt an unfillable void. I imagined Dad standing there in his worn-out shirt, hands smeared with oil, his eyes alight as he started the engine. That afternoon, a light rain fell, draping Atlanta in a thin mist. I was in the workshop, the hum of machinery blending with the patter of rain outside. My phone suddenly rang, a number I didn't recognize. I hesitated, thinking it might be a client, but a gut feeling told me something was different. I answered. "Hello, is this Caleb Reeves?" The voice on the other end was gravelly, slow, like someone who'd seen too many years. "I'm Grayson, owner of Grayson's Classics Garage in Atlanta. I've got your father's Aston Martin DB6. We need to talk." I froze, the wrench slipping from my hand and clanging onto the floor. My heart pounded like it was trying to break free. Dad's car. It still existed. But how was it with Grayson? And why was he calling me now? What? The Aston Martin? How do you have it? I stammered, my voice trembling. Grayson chuckled softly, a dry sound without malice. "Calm down, son. I'm not a thief. Can you come to my garage now? I'm on Peachtree near downtown. I'll explain everything." I don't remember how I responded, only that I hurriedly gathered my things, ignoring my oil-stained clothes, and jumped into my car. I drove like a machine, my mind swirling with questions. Who was Grayson? How did he have the car? Was this some kind of scam? But deep down, a flicker of hope sparked. The hope that I could reclaim Dad's legacy, a piece of him. Grayson's Classics Garage sat on a quiet street corner, its neon sign glowing faintly through the rain. I pushed open the door. Inside, vintage cars were neatly lined up, gleaming under fluorescent lights. An older man with silver hair wearing a worn leather jacket stepped out from behind a Rolls-Royce. His face was weathered, his eyes deep, and a faint smile played on his lips. "Caleb Reeves," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Grayson. Thanks for coming." I shook his hand, feeling its roughness like Dad's. "Where's the car?" I asked, cutting to the chase. I didn't want to prolong this moment, didn't want to build hope only to be disappointed. Grayson motioned for me to follow. He led me through rows of cars to a secluded corner of the garage where a white cloth covered a familiar shape. My heart raced as he pulled the cloth away. The Aston Martin DB6 appeared, shining like a jewel. Every curve, every detail, from the chrome grille to the deep green paint, was Dad's. I stepped forward, placing my hand on the hood, the cool metal feeling like a greeting from the past. "How did you get it?" I asked, my voice hoarse. Grayson sat on an old wooden chair, gesturing for me to sit across from him. He lit a cigarette, the smoke curling in the air. Then he began, "Your father, Weston, and I were close friends. Over 40 years ago, we opened a small garage together in Savannah. We dreamed of building the finest classic cars, but after a few years, I moved on to bigger business, while Weston stayed true to the craft. He was a man of honor, Caleb. People like him are rare." I nodded, fighting back tears. "I know. But the car, how did it end up here?" Grayson sighed, looking at me with eyes both sad and stern. "A young woman brought it here last week. Said her name was Mira, claimed she was authorized to sell it. I recognized it immediately as Weston's. No other Aston Martin DB6 in Georgia looks like this. I asked why she was selling and she got nervous, said it was an inheritance, that she needed money fast. But I didn't buy it. I'd seen the way Weston looked when he talked about this car. It wasn't just money, it was his life. My blood ran cold. Mira. She'd sold Dad's car, his final legacy, like it was just another commodity. How much did she ask for?" I asked, knowing the answer would hurt. Grayson shook his head. "She wanted $3 million, but I haven't paid. I told her I needed to verify the car's origins first. That's why I called you. Caleb, why did you let her sell your father's prized car?" I gave a bitter laugh, my voice laced with pain. "I didn't let her. She's my wife. She left, took the car, and I didn't know until you called." Grayson was silent for a long moment, his eyes studying me as if weighing something. Then he stood, clapping a hand on my shoulder. "You're more like your father than you know. Weston saved me from bankruptcy, you know that. Years ago when my garage was about to go under, he loaned me money, no contract, just a handshake. I owe him a debt of honor, and now I'm repaying it. He led me back to the car, resting his hand on the hood as if saying goodbye. Take it home, Caleb. This car belongs to you. I won't take a dime. I was stunned, unable to believe my ears. Mr. Grayson, this car's worth millions. I can't just take it. Grayson smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him. You don't get it, do you? This isn't about money. It's about honor. Weston wouldn't want this car in anyone's hands but his son's. Take it, Caleb, and live up to it. I didn't know what to say. Tears welled up, not from sadness, but from the feeling that Dad was here, in Grayson's words, in the car he loved. I gripped Grayson's hand tightly. Thank you. I won't forget this. That night I drove the Aston Martin home, its low, warm engine humming like a lullaby. I parked in front of the apartment, sitting in the dark, hands on the steering wheel. Every detail, the smell of old leather, the ticking of the dashboard clock, was Dad. I felt him closer than ever, as if he were reminding me I still had a reason to keep going. The next morning, I spent the entire time cleaning and inspecting every detail of the Aston Martin. Each soft hum of the engine, each whiff of aged leather brought Dad back to me. I opened every compartment, wiped down every seam of the seats as if I were talking to him through the scratches left by time. When I opened the rear storage compartment, my hand brushed against a slight bulge. I pressed gently and discovered a cleverly hidden double lining. Tucked inside was a thick folder sealed in a nylon bag labeled with Dad's familiar handwriting. My heart pounded. I didn't know what was inside, but I had a clear premonition that what I held in my hands would change everything. I brought the folder inside and set it on the kitchen table under the dim yellow light. My hands trembled as I opened the nylon bag, as if I were touching a secret Dad had kept hidden for years. Inside was a hefty stack of documents, pages, photographs, email copies, and bank transfer records. All bore Dylan's name. I flipped through them, my breathing growing heavier. Photos showed Dylan in upscale bars, standing beside older, expensively dressed women. Forged emails, loan contracts, and large transfers to untraceable accounts. Each document was a puzzle piece painting a picture of a Dylan I never truly knew. A con artist who preyed on wealthy women in Atlanta to swindle their money. Among the papers, I found a handwritten letter in Dad's hurried scrawl. I sat down, heart pounding, and began to read. Caleb, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer there to tell you in person. I've known about Dylan's actions for a long time, but I didn't have the courage to act. I hoped he'd change, that the love of our family would pull him back. But I was wrong. What's in this folder is evidence of Dylan's sins, his scams, his lies. I'm leaving it to you because I trust you'll know what to do. Do the right thing, Caleb, no matter how much it hurts. I'm proud of you. Tears fell onto the paper, blurring the ink. Dad had known. He'd known about Dylan, about what he was doing, but he didn't act, perhaps because he didn't want to tear the family apart. And now, he'd left this burden to me. I felt both angry and heartbroken, angry at Dylan for betraying us all, at Mom for always shielding him, and at myself for not seeing the truth sooner. I sat there in the silent apartment, the folder spread out before me like a verdict. I thought about Mira, how she left with Dylan taking Dad's car. Did she know about his scams? Was she another of Dylan's victims, or was she part of his game? I had no answers, but I knew I couldn't let things end here. The next day, I drove to Savannah with the folder. I went to the old wooden house where Mom sat in an armchair, staring out at the river through the window. She looked older, her face lined with wrinkles, her eyes red as if she'd cried all night. Caleb, she said when she saw me, her voice frail. What brings you here? I placed the folder on the table in front of her. Mom, I need you to look at this. She glanced at the folder, her face shifting. She recognized Dad's handwriting. What is this, Caleb? She asked, but her voice trembled as if she already sensed part of the truth. I told her everything. About the car, Grayson, and what I found in the hidden compartment. I pointed to the folder, my voice firm but unable to hide the pain. Dylan didn't just betray me, Mom. He's a con artist, stealing from others. Dad knew, but he didn't act because he wanted to keep the family together. But I can't let him keep hurting people. Mom shook her head, her hands gripping the edge of the table. No, Caleb. Dylan couldn't do those things. It's all a misunderstanding. He just lost his way. Lost his way? I nearly shouted, pushing the folder toward her. Open it, Mom. Read what Dad left behind. Dylan didn't just steal from others, he's torn this family apart. He took Mira, took Dad's car, and you still want me to forgive him? Mom broke into tears but didn't touch the folder. Caleb, you don't understand. Dylan's your blood. You can't turn your back on him. I looked at her, feeling like my heart was being crushed. Mom, I never wanted to turn my back on family, I said softly, my voice choking. But the truth matters more. If you can't face it, then I'll do what Dad couldn't. She looked up, her eyes panicked. What are you going to do, Caleb? Go to the police? Put your brother in jail? You can't do that. It'll destroy him. Is it better to let him destroy others? I asked, my voice bitter. Mom, I've lost Dad, my wife, and now I'm losing you. But I can't let Dylan keep living like this. I gathered the folder and walked out of the house in silence. Mom called my name, her voice breaking, but I didn't turn back. I knew if I looked into her eyes, I wouldn't have the strength to do what needed to be done. That night, I sat in the garage for a long time, the yellow light casting a glow on the gleaming Aston Martin, a silent witness. On the table, the thick folder lay open, its pages heavy with weight. I didn't know what to do with the evidence Dad left behind, evidence that could cost my brother everything. I looked at the car, and for a moment I could almost hear Dad's voice echoing from deep within my memories. Caleb, honor isn't something you can buy or sell. It's something you must keep, even if you lose everything else. I bowed my head, closing my eyes. I knew sooner or later I'd have to do the right thing, no matter how much more it would hurt than any wound before. On a dreary winter afternoon, Atlanta's sky hung heavy with gray clouds, a light rain falling like endless tears. I sat in the apartment, a cold coffee mug on the table, my gaze vacant as I stared out the window. A sudden, urgent knock at the door broke through my thoughts. I frowned, unsure who would visit at this hour. When I opened the door, I nearly froze. Mira stood there, drenched from head to toe, her hair plastered to her pale face. Her eyes were swollen and red, as if she'd been crying for hours. The dress she wore was crumpled, bearing no trace of the woman who once captivated me. She trembled, her lips quivering as if trying to speak, but only broken sounds came out. Caleb, she whispered, her voice frail, almost drowned out by the rain. I'm sorry. I said nothing, standing there, my hand still gripping the doorknob. I wanted to slam the door, to yell at her for everything she'd done, but seeing her face now, my anger didn't flare as I'd expected. Instead, I felt an emptiness, an exhaustion that seeped into my bones, as if the pain had surpassed the limits of rage. I looked at her, as if staring at a stranger. Caleb, please. Mira stepped forward, her voice breaking. I need to talk to you. I was deceived. Dylan, he took everything. I gestured for her to come inside, not because I wanted to hear her, but because I wasn't cruel enough to leave her standing in the rain. She sat on the sofa, arms wrapped around herself as if trying to keep from falling apart. I leaned against the wall, keeping my distance, waiting. Mira began to speak, her voice trembling and halting. She said Dylan had promised her a new life, a fresh start in Florida. He spoke of a big investment, a chance for them to begin anew. He said he loved me, she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. He said you didn't understand me, that you were too caught up in your work in your father's car. I was foolish, Caleb. I believed him. She recounted how she'd handed over the entire $1.5 million from selling the car to Dylan, believing it was for their future. But soon after, he cut contact. He vanished, leaving her with nothing. Not just the money, but her dignity, her job, and everything she'd built had crumbled. She'd lost her job for neglecting her duties, lost friends over lies to cover her relationship with Dylan. And now she stood before me, a broken woman. I listened silently, not interrupting. I had loved Mira once, believed she was the one who'd stand by me through anything. But now, watching her sob, I realized that love had died long ago, perhaps the moment she chose to leave me. "Caleb, I know I don't deserve forgiveness," Mira said, her voice choked. "But please, give me a chance. I'll do anything to make it right." "Mira," I said, my voice low but firm, "I forgive you because I don't want to live with resentment. But we can't go back. You made your choice and now you have to face the consequences." Mira broke down, collapsing to the floor, her hands clutching my legs. "Caleb, please! I have nothing left. I need you." I stood still, offering no nod, no words of comfort. I knew that if I reached out, if I let her back in, I'd betray myself. I'd betray what Dad taught me about honor, about living true to myself. Gently, I pried her hands away, my voice soft but resolute. "Mira, go. I can't help you anymore." She looked at me, her eyes hollow, then slowly stood. She walked to the door without another word, leaving behind a heavy silence. I didn't watch her go. The door closed with a thud, and I knew it was the end of a chapter of my life. That night, I opened the safe in the garage and took out the folder Dad had left. Each document was a stab, but this time I didn't hesitate. Everything was clear as day. Dylan hadn't just destroyed our family, he was still harming others. He'd deceived Mira, other women, and likely wouldn't stop unless someone intervened. I thought of Dad, of the letter he left. "Do the right thing, Caleb," he wrote, "no matter how much it hurts." His voice echoed in my mind, warm and steady. Justice may come late, but it never disappears. I realized it was time to do what Dad had hesitated to do. Not out of revenge, but because I couldn't let Dylan keep spreading pain. The next morning, I drove the Aston Martin to Mitchell's office, the old family lawyer, in downtown Atlanta. The sky was still overcast, with a light drizzle falling, as if the world were trying to soothe the fire in my heart. I stepped into the office, the folder tucked in a black briefcase heavy like a sentence. Mitchell sat behind his desk, his expression serious but tinged with empathy. He pushed his glasses up and looked at me. "You sure about this, Caleb? This is the final step. No turning back." I nodded, placing the briefcase on the desk. "I'm sure. This isn't personal. It's about right and wrong." Mitchell opened the case, flipping through the pages of the folder, his eyes growing sharper. The photos, forged emails, bank transfer records, all undeniable evidence of Dylan's scams. "Caleb," he said, his voice low, "this is enough to press criminal charges. Dylan could face years in prison for fraud and embezzlement. You understand that, don't you?" I nodded, but my heart tightened. Dylan was my brother, the one who used to trail me in Dad's garage, laughing with me by the Savannah River. I couldn't let personal feelings stop justice. "Do what needs to be done, Mitchell," I said, my voice steady, though my heart trembled. Mitchell nodded and stood. "All right, we'll go to the police station today. You coming with me?" I looked out the window where raindrops slid down the glass. "I have to," I replied, "for my father." We arrived at the local police station at noon as Atlanta lay shrouded in winter's chill. I sat across from a middle-aged officer with a stern face and sharp eyes. Mitchell explained briefly, handing over the folder. The officer flipped through the pages, his brow furrowing. "This is serious," he said, his voice low. "We'll open an investigation immediately." "Mr. Reeves, you're sure this is your brother?" I swallowed hard, feeling like my throat was being squeezed. "Yes, sir. Dylan Reeves." The officer nodded, jotting something in his notebook. "We'll search his residence. If what you've provided is accurate, we'll issue a warrant if necessary." News of the investigation spread like wildfire. Just hours after I left the station, my phone buzzed relentlessly. It was Mom. I hesitated but pressed answer. Her voice on the other end was frantic, almost a scream. "Caleb, what are you doing? You reported Dylan to the police? My son. How could you do this to your brother?" I gripped the phone, trying to stay calm. "Mom, I don't want to hurt anyone. But Dylan did wrong. He's been scamming people. Not just me, not just Mira, but others. I can't let him keep doing it." Mom sobbed, her voice breaking. "You don't understand, Caleb. Dylan just lost his way. You could talk to him, fix things. Why did you have to put him in jail?" "Mom, I've given Dylan too many chances," I replied, my voice firm but laced with pain. "I can't do that. I have to do what's right." "Right!" Mom shouted, her voice full of reproach. "You're destroying this family, Caleb. You're his older brother. You're supposed to protect him, not throw him in prison." Her words cut like a knife, but I didn't waver. "Mom, if I cover for Dylan, I'd betray myself. I'd betray Dad. I'm sorry, but I can't stop." She hung up, leaving me with the hollow beep of the line. I sank onto the sofa, my mind reeling. I knew Mom was hurting, but I also knew she'd never accept the truth about Dylan. In her eyes, he'd always be the baby she needed to protect, no matter what he did. The police moved quickly. 2 days later, they searched Dylan's apartment on the outskirts of Atlanta. What they found was worse than I'd imagined. In the cluttered space filled with empty liquor bottles and expensive clothes, they uncovered more documents. Lists of other victims, scam messages, even a journal detailing Dylan's deals. Mira was just one of many, a prey in the web Dylan had woven. I got a call from the officer, his voice cold but tinged with astonishment. "Mr. Reeves, your brother deceived a lot of people. We're expanding the investigation. He could face multiple serious charges. But Dylan was gone. He wasn't at the apartment when the police arrived. A warrant was issued, and I knew sooner or later he'd be caught. 3 weeks later, I got word that Dylan had been arrested. They found him in a cheap motel in Florida, trying to flee with what was left of his scam money. The police brought him back to Atlanta for detention and investigation. I heard the news from Mitchell, his voice calm but tense. "Caleb, he could face 7 years in prison or more, depending on the number of victims and damages. Do you want to see him?" I stayed silent, staring out the window where faint sunlight tried to pierce the gray clouds. "Not yet," I said. "I'm not ready." After hanging up, I sat on the garage floor beside the Aston Martin. I thought of Dylan, picturing him in a prison jumpsuit, his eyes likely filled with resentment. I didn't feel joy or triumph. After all, he was still my brother. 3 days after Dylan's detention, as I was polishing the Aston Martin in the garage, I heard a knock at the door. When I opened it, there stood Mom, trembling in a thin coat, her silver hair disheveled, her eyes red as if she'd cried all night. She looked at me, her gaze a mix of anger and pain, as if I were the one who had torn her heart apart. "Caleb," she said, her voice quivering, "what have you done to this family?" I gestured for her to come inside, but she didn't move. She stood there under the dim morning light, her hands clutching the edges of her coat. "I regret it," she said, her voice choked with tears. "I regret letting things go this far. I spoiled Dylan too much, I know. But you're his older brother. You could have stopped. You could have forgiven." I looked at her, feeling my heart constrict. I wanted to hug her, to tell her I was hurting too, that I didn't want things to come to this. But I just stood there, silent, my hands hanging limp. "Mom," I finally said, my voice low but firm, "I didn't do this to punish Dylan. I did it because the truth has to be put back in its place. Dylan hurt too many people. I couldn't let him keep going." Mom shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. "But he's your brother, Caleb. How can you see him in prison and not feel heartbroken?" I didn't answer right away. I thought of Dylan, but also of his victims, of Mira, of the other women he'd deceived. "Mom," I said, my voice hoarse, "I am heartbroken. But I can't let that pain stop me from doing what's right. Dad left the evidence because he trusted me to do it." Mom looked at me, her eyes shattered. She said nothing more, only turned and walked away, her frail figure fading into the dim light. I stood there watching her go, feeling like a part of me left with her. But I knew, even if she didn't understand, I had chosen the path Dad would have wanted me to take. Dylan's trial took place 2 weeks later in a cold Atlanta courtroom. I sat in the back row, hands clasped tightly, my eyes fixed on Dylan's back. He wore an orange prison jumpsuit, his head bowed, his once groomed hair now a mess. For the first time, he looked small, fragile, as if all the smugness that once defined him had vanished. I felt no joy, no satisfaction, only a deep emptiness, as if I were looking at a stranger who used to be my brother. The prosecutor read the charges, listing each scam Dylan had committed. The victims, women ranging from wealthy widows to hardworking people like Mira, had all fallen prey to him. The stolen money amounted to millions, and the list of victims was longer than I'd imagined. Each word from the prosecutor was like a knife, cutting not just into Dylan but into me as well. I thought of Dad, how he'd quietly gathered evidence, perhaps hoping Dylan would change. But he didn't, and now he had to pay the price. Dylan said nothing during the trial, only bowing his head, his shoulders trembling slightly. When the judge asked if he had anything to say, he just shook his head. I looked at him, searching for a sign of remorse, but saw nothing but silence. The judge delivered the sentence: 7 years in prison for fraud and embezzlement, with the possibility of parole if Dylan cooperated. The gavel struck, a dry, final sound like a period at the end of his story. One ordinary morning, I stepped outside to check the mailbox. A yellow envelope sat quietly in the corner, its edges damp from the night's dew. In the top corner was faint text: Chatham County Correctional Facility. I knew immediately who it was from. I brought the letter inside and placed it on the wooden table by the window. For a long time, I just stared at the scrawled handwriting on the sender's line. A heavy, mixed feeling stirred in me. Not anger, but a weight. Finally, I opened the envelope and read each line slowly. Caleb. Mom came to see me. She sat across from me through the glass, crying nonstop. She said she still believes I'll change, that I need to eat well, stay healthy, and behave so I can get out early. I nodded to ease her mind, but honestly, I didn't hear much. All I could think about was how you put me here. You were always the one Dad trusted, the one who got his love, who stood in the light. And me, I was just the shadow, always compared, lectured, pushed to be a better person. You say you did the right thing, but have you ever known what it feels like to be condemned by your own family? Mom told me to forgive you. But how can I when you're the one who took everything from me? The garage, my freedom, my dignity, and the last shred of family trust. You call it justice. I call it betrayal. Maybe one day I'll understand your reasons. But not today, Dylan. I folded the letter and set it on the table. I sat in silence for a long time, feeling neither anger nor blame, just a quiet sadness seeping into my heart. I tucked the letter into a drawer next to an old photo of us as kids. 2 brothers standing by Dad, grinning brightly beside an unfinished car. I let out a soft breath, whispering as if to the past itself. One day, you'll understand that justice isn't betrayal, but the only way to hold on to the last bit of light left in this family. A month after the trial, I drove to the cemetery in Savannah where Dad rested. A light rain fell, the sky heavy with gray clouds, the wind whispering through the trees carrying the chill of winter. I walked along the gravel path, my shoes caked with mud, holding a bouquet of white daisies, the kind Dad used to grow behind the house. The cemetery was silent save for the patter of rain and the sound of my footsteps. I stopped before Dad's gravestone, the inscription simple but weighty: Weston Reeves, a mechanic of honor. I knelt, placing the flowers before the stone, my hand touching its cold surface. I didn't speak right away, letting the silence envelop me. In that moment, I felt Dad's presence, not in body, but in the memories he left behind, in the hum of engines, the smell of oil, the lessons he taught me. Dad, I whispered, my voice hoarse, I did everything the way you would have, and I hope you're proud. I thought of Dylan, the trial, Mom's eyes as she looked at him through the prison glass. I thought of Mira, how she left, taking with her the world I once believed in. And I thought of Mom, the cracks between us, the wounds time might heal but would always leave scars. I didn't want to lose this family, I said to the gravestone as if Dad could hear. But I had to do what was right. I hope you understand. The rain fell harder, soaking through my coat, but I didn't leave. I stood there, hands still on the stone, feeling a connection to Dad, to what he'd left behind. I knew that though the path I'd chosen was painful, it was the only way to live true to myself. Leaving the cemetery, I drove the Aston Martin along the Savannah River Road where I grew up. The engine's low, warm hum was like a lullaby, the scent of old leather and oil filling my senses, bringing back afternoons in the garage with Dad. I remembered how he'd lean over an engine, hands stained but eyes alight with pride. I remembered Dylan running after me laughing when Dad let us start the car. Those memories were like an old book now, both cherished and painful. The riverside road curved, lined with towering oaks. I drove slowly, letting the engine's sound blend with the wind, letting memories flow like the river beside me. I didn't know if Dylan would ever see his mistakes, but I hoped one day he'd understand that justice wasn't punishment. It was a chance to start over. In the weeks that followed, Mom and I began to mend things little by little. She visited me in Atlanta, bringing a tray of homemade cookies, the kind she used to make when Dylan and I were kids. We sat in the apartment, winter light streaming through the window, and for the first time in months, we talked without arguing. She didn't mention Dylan, but I saw the pain in her eyes, the pain of a mother who'd lost the son she loved most. "Caleb," she said softly, "I'm sorry. I was wrong to always defend Dylan. I just wanted to protect him, but I didn't realize I was hurting him. And hurting you." I took her hand, feeling her frail fingers. "Mom, I don't blame you. I just want us to be honest with each other. Dylan will have a chance to start over, but he has to face it himself." She nodded, tears rolling down her cheeks. "I know. I just hope he'll understand one day." We started visiting Dylan in prison, not often, but enough to keep some connection. The visits were always heavy. Dylan spoke little, his eyes avoiding mine, as if I were the one who'd pushed him into the dark. Mom cried and begged him to reform. I stood there, silent, hoping time would do what I couldn't. In the months that followed, my life began to find a rhythm again, though it was never quite the same. I returned to the workshop in Atlanta, where old machines still waited for me to breathe life into them. Each turn of the wrench, each roar of an engine starting brought me back to the days with Dad in the old Savannah garage. The Aston Martin DB6 became the center of my world, not just a legacy but a reminder to live with honor as Dad had taught me. I spent hours polishing it, checking every detail, not because it needed it, but because it was how I felt Dad was still by my side. Mom visited more often. Our conversations grew gentler, no longer fraught with tension. One evening, as we sat on the porch in Savannah watching the river glisten under the sunset, Mom took my hand, her voice soft. "You're more like your father than I realized. He'd be proud of you, Caleb." Her words were like a ray of sunlight piercing the fog in my heart. I knew that though our family would never be what it once was, we were building something new, not based on secrecy or indulgence, but on truth and forgiveness. The visits to Dylan continued, though not frequently. Dylan was still himself, but I began to notice small changes. Once he asked about the Aston Martin, his voice lacking the bitterness it once held. "Still running well?" he said, almost a whisper. "Runs great," I replied, looking him in the eye. "Dad took good care of it." Dylan lowered his head, saying nothing more, but I saw a flicker in his eyes. Maybe regret, maybe nostalgia. I wasn't sure, but I hoped that in the next 7 years he'd find his path, as Dad once hoped. One evening I sat in the garage, moonlight streaming through the window, making the Aston Martin gleam like a jewel. I opened the drawer and took out the old family photo. Dad, Mom, Dylan, and me smiling brightly beside an unfinished car. I thought about my journey, the losses, the wounds, and the lessons I'd learned. I thought of Dad, how he taught me that honor was the most precious thing, that justice wasn't about revenge but about living true to yourself. I want to speak to those reading this story, those facing tough choices, carrying wounds too deep to voice. Life is never easy, and sometimes doing the right thing means losing the ones you love. But remember, honor isn't something you can buy or sell. It's the small flame in your heart that helps you rise after every fall. Justice isn't about winning. It's about looking in the mirror without shame. I lost Dad, Mira, and nearly lost Mom and Dylan. But I didn't lose myself. And that's what matters most. If you're facing darkness, find the light in what you believe. Live true to yourself no matter the cost. Because in the end, that's the only way to find peace. I stood stepping out of the garage, leaving the Aston Martin bathed in moonlight. I looked up at the sky, where stars began to twinkle through the clouds. I heard Dad's voice, warm and steady as if he were standing beside me. "Good job, Caleb. You did right." I smiled for the first time in months, feeling a lightness flood my heart. I knew, whatever the future held, I'd keep walking my path with honor as my guiding torch. Guiding torch, 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 guiding torch,